Have you ever imagined a world where America's most iconic presidents never made it to a second term?
Hmm.
Like what if Roosevelt or Kennedy
Oh, yeah.
or even Lincoln had been taken out by an assassin's bullet early on?
Yeah.
Today we're going to take a deep dive into the surprisingly long history of failed presidential assassination attempts
Wow.
in the U.S.
Okay.
And we're going to explore some chilling what-if scenarios with our resident history expert.
I'm excited.
So our sources for this deep dive are an audio lecture and podcast by historian Gary Gersel, who was interviewed by Dan Snow.
Okay, cool.
What I find so intriguing about these close calls is they make you wonder, how would some of the most pivotal moments in U.S. history, elections, economic policies, maybe even wars have played out differently?
Totally.
Let's start with one of the earliest examples.
Okay.
Picture this. It's 1835. Andrew Jackson, a man they called Old Hickory,
Right.
is leaving a funeral when suddenly a man rushes at him, not with a handshake, but with two pistols at point-blank range.
Oh, wow.
And get this, both pistols misfire.
What?
What happens next is almost too crazy to believe.
Okay.
Jackson actually beats the would-be assassin with his cane.
He beat him with his cane.
Talk about a tough president.
Wow.
But I'm curious,
Yeah.
do you think Jackson's survival actually changed the course of history? His policies were already making waves, weren't they?
It's true. Jackson was a powerful figure, and his policies, especially those focused on westward expansion and a kind of populist politics, were already gaining traction.
Right.
So even if he had died, then it's likely those trends would have continued.
Okay.
What's fascinating is that sometimes even these dramatic events
Yeah.
might not have shifted the trajectory of history as much as we might think.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
But what about a president in the middle of a national crisis?
Okay.
Let's fast forward to 1864.
Okay.
The Civil War is raging.
Right.
And picture this. Abraham Lincoln gets his hat shot off by a sniper
Wow.
a whole year before John Wilkes Booth enters the scene.
That's crazy.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What if Lincoln had been killed then?
That's a truly chilling what if.
Yeah.
Lincoln possessed unique skills as a negotiator and a unifier,
Right.
especially crucial for the period following the Civil War.
Right.
Had he been assassinated in 1864,
Right.
Reconstruction, the reintegration of the Confederacy, and the fight for civil rights for African Americans could have been drastically different.
Wow.
He was really the only one who could have navigated that period so effectively.
It really makes you wonder how different things might have been.
Yeah,
Imagine a negotiated peace with the Confederacy.
right.
Maybe even greater autonomy for the South.
Yeah,
That could have set back civil rights for generations.
exactly.
Wow.
Without Lincoln's leadership, the ripple effects would still be felt today.
It's crazy to think about.
It really highlights how a single life can be the linchpin holding history together, especially during times of great upheaval.
And sometimes those close calls become part of a president's legend.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Take Teddy Roosevelt in 1912.
Okay.
He's giving a speech, gets shot in the chest,
What?
and just keeps on talking with the bullet lodged in there.
He kept talking.
You can't make this stuff up.
No.
It solidified his image as the bull moose president,
Of course.
but did it actually affect the election, which, as we know, he lost?
While it's an incredible story that really captures the public imagination,
Right.
its impact on the election was probably minimal.
Hmm.
Roosevelt still lost to Woodrow Wilson.
Interesting.
It's a reminder that sometimes even a brush with death isn't enough to sway voters.
Wow.
But there are other near misses that could have had far greater consequences,
Okay.
even if they're not as well known.
Cool.
One that comes to mind is the attempted assassination of FDR in 1933,
FDR.
before he even took office.
Wait, FDR was almost assassinated before becoming president.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that story.
Really?
Tell me more.
It's one of those events that deserves more attention.
Okay.
Imagine this. FDR is riding in an open car when suddenly an anarchist gunman emerges from the crowd and starts firing.
Oh, wow. Did they hit FDR?
They missed him.
Oh, wow.
But tragically, the mayor of Chicago who was riding with FDR was killed.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for us today? How different would America have been without FDR during the Depression and World War II?
That's a huge what if to grapple with.
Yeah.
FDR's impact on U.S. history is undeniable.
Right.
Think about the New Deal, his leadership during World War II,
Right.
his ability to rally a nation in crisis.
Yeah.
Without him, it's possible the Depression would have lasted much longer,
Right.
and America's role in the war.
Yeah.
Well, that could have been dramatically different.
It's almost too much to think about.
Yeah.
A world without Social Security,
Right.
without the U.S. leading the fight against fascism.
It really raises the question, how much did individual leaders shape these events?
Right.
And how much were they simply riding the wave of larger historical forces?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And we're just getting started.
Okay.
I'm already hooked on these what-ifs.
Yeah.
What else have you got?
Well, it really is fascinating to consider how these individual moments could have reshaped entire decades.
Yeah.
And as we move into the Cold War era,
Okay.
the stakes get even higher.
Right.
This period was a constant balancing act
Yeah.
on the edge of nuclear war.
Right.
Imagine how a different president might have navigated those tensions.
It's like walking a tightrope with the fate of the world hanging in the balance.
Exactly.
So were there any close calls during the Cold War
Oh, yeah,
that could have changed everything?
absolutely.
Okay.
In 1950,
Yeah?
President Truman
Right.
faced a brazen attack at Blair House, where he was living during renovations to the White House.
Oh, wow.
2 Puerto Rican nationalists stormed the building and got into a shootout with Secret Service agents right there on the property.
A shootout at Blair House.
Yeah,
That's wild.
it was.
Did Truman make it out okay?
Incredibly, he did.
Oh, wow.
Sadly, a White House policeman was killed and others were wounded.
Oh, God.
But Truman survived.
So Truman survives this attack
Yeah,
and goes on to lead the U.S. deeper into the Cold War.
right.
But what if he hadn't?
Mm,
How much did his leadership really matter at
Yeah.
that point?
that's a complex question.
Yeah.
By 1950, Truman had already laid the groundwork for the Cold War
Right.
with policies like the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan.
Okay.
And domestically, he was committed to continuing the New Deal program started by FDR.
Okay.
What's interesting is that even his successor, Eisenhower, a Republican,
Right.
largely continued these policies.
So you could argue that by 1950, the direction of the U.S. was already pretty well established,
I think so.
even if the players changed.
Yeah.
But what about a president who's often credited with ending the Cold War? Ronald Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
He had his own brush with an assassin in 1981.
Right, the John Hinckley Jr. incident.
Oh, yeah.
It was almost surreal.
Yeah.
Hinckley shoots Reagan trying to impress actress Jodie Foster. Reagan is seriously wounded.
Yeah.
A bullet ricocheted off his limo and lodged near his heart.
Gosh.
It's remarkable that he not only survived, but went on to serve a full 2 terms.
So Reagan's presidency was a turning point,
It was.
not just for the Cold War,
Right.
but also for economic policy in the U.S.
Yeah.
How much did his survival impact those shifts?
That's a topic historians still debate fiercely.
I bet.
There's no doubt that Reagan strongly advocated for free markets and globalization,
Right.
policies often associated with the rise of neoliberalism,
Shit.
and his aggressive stance toward the Soviet Union,
Right.
famously calling it the evil empire,
Right.
is viewed by some as a key factor in the Soviet collapse.
But wasn't the Soviet system already cracking from within?
It's true.
How much credit can we really give Reagan for its downfall?
It's true that the Soviet Union was facing internal challenges,
Boy.
but Reagan's policies and rhetoric undoubtedly played a role.
Okay.
His military buildup and support for anti-communist movements around the world put immense pressure on the Soviet system.
I see.
It's impossible to know for sure what would have happened if he hadn't survived the assassination attempt,
Yeah.
but his vice president, George H.W. Bush,
Right.
might have taken a less confrontational approach.
That raises a really interesting question.
Yeah,
How much of history is shaped by individual personalities
right.
versus larger forces already in motion?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And as we move beyond the Cold War,
Yeah.
the answer becomes even more elusive.
It feels like the world got a lot more complex after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
For sure.
So what kinds of threats did presidents face in this new era?
Whoa.
Yeah, it seems like once the Cold War ended, the threats to presidents became less about one big enemy and more about a whole range of dangers.
Right.
Terrorism, rogue states, extremist groups.
Mm-hmm.
It all got a lot harder to predict.
You're absolutely right. And those evolving dangers meant security had to adapt, too,
Oh,
in 1993. There was a very real plot to kill former President George H.W. Bush
oh wow.
while he was visiting Kuwait.
Really?
They actually found a car bomb packed with explosives,
Wow.
ready to go just days before he arrived.
Wow, that's chilling.
It was.
So this wasn't just a threat.
No,
It was a full-on assassination plan.
it
Who was
was.
behind it?
The FBI traced it back to Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that presidents can remain targets even after they leave office,
Right.
often because of actions they took while they were in power.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if the shadow of that attempt on his father played any part in George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq in 2003.
It's an interesting theory.
Yeah.
And some people do believe that George W. Bush might have been motivated by revenge.
Right.
But we also have to remember that there are a lot of other factors at play
Yeah.
in the decision to invade Iraq.
Of course.
The official justification was that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. But there were also geopolitical concerns like oil and the idea of spreading democracy in the Middle East.
So it sounds like while a personal motive might have been a factor,
Yeah,
it was probably just one piece of a much bigger and more complicated puzzle.
exactly. And speaking of complicated puzzles,
Okay.
let's talk about a near miss that could have completely changed how 9/11 and the war on terror unfolded.
Okay.
In 1996,
Okay.
President Clinton's motorcade was rerouted in Manila
Okay.
just minutes before they were supposed to cross a bridge.
Oh, wow.
Later, they found a bomb planted under that bridge by a group connected to Osama bin Laden.
Wow, that's another close call that's hard to even fathom.
Yeah.
If that bomb had gone off and Clinton had been killed,
Right.
Al Gore would have been president during 9/11.
That's right. And it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
given Gore's different approach to foreign policy,
Yeah.
his focus on things like diplomacy and climate change,
Right.
how might the U.S. response to 9/11 have been different?
Right.
Would we have even gone to war in Iraq?
It's mind-blowing to think how a seemingly small event like a last-minute change of route
Right.
could have had such massive repercussions on history.
Yeah.
It really underscores the role of chance and coincidence in shaping the world.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we can't just look at big personalities or
Right.
sweeping historical trends.
Yeah.
Sometimes the tiniest details can make all the difference.
So true. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from Andrew Jackson's cane-wielding defense
Yeah.
to plots involving car bombs and Osama bin Laden.
It's a lot.
What's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners will ponder after this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that history isn't a straight line.
Okay.
It's a series of choices, accidents, and close calls
Right.
that could have easily gone in a completely different direction.
Right.
These presidential near misses really show us how fragile leadership can be,
Yeah.
how unpredictable events are,
Right.
and how even seemingly small actions can have huge ripple effects
Yeah.
that shape the course of history.
I love that.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're all part of this unfolding story,
We are.
and that even our everyday choices can have unexpected consequences down the line.
Exactly. So next time you read about a historical event
Okay.
or see something happening in the news,
Yeah.
take a moment to think about the what ifs.
Right.
What if that leader had made a different decision?
Yeah.
What if that event had never happened at all?
It's crazy.
You might be surprised by the alternate histories you uncover.
That's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into presidential near misses.
My pleasure.
It's been a truly eye-opening journey through the twists and turns of history.
It has.
And to all our listeners out there, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive
Yes.
for more thought-provoking explorations of history, science, and everything in between.
Absolutely.
We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to get those brain cells firing.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, keep diving deep.